I have prepared this presentation based on a research project that I did with, in fact, Margaret Sims, who's a New Zealander, and my colleague, Faye Hadley from Macquarie University. And depending on how much time I have, I've put in a few quotable quotes from the voices of the practitioners who were involved in that study. It's actually quite troubling me at one stage, in the sense that I may not be able to do justice to anything because I'm trying to do too much with this presentation. So I apologize in advance for cherry picking ideas to share with you today. And hopefully there will be some logic in the presentation and something for everybody to take away from today. And I'm very happy to take questions from you. I begin with a couple of voices from the practitioners who were involved in this study that I was referring to. The study itself was done in 2015 and 2016. Just going back to the title of the presentation, Confused, Compliant, or Courageous. And I was saying to Maria today that because I was analyzing the data from a leadership perspective, I was looking for those words in the data that I analyzed, and to what extent I have been successful in being able to find practitioners who were courageous is a question mark that you can see for yourself, but I think the other two will be pretty obvious for you. So anyway, the first one you could see, the EDL title stands for Educational Leader, which is a mandated position in Australia now. Since 2012, our government created the position of an educational leader, and that in itself is unique. I think I haven't come across such a person anywhere else in early childhood, and I'll unpack that a little bit more about exactly what is expected under government policy. So this educational leader says that my understanding of the role and my actual role differ. I believe the role of an educational leader should be to support, encourage, and gather learning resources for the team teaching the children. What I actually do is monitor how many observations the team are doing, inform management of their quality and quantity. What do you think? Pretty awful, isn't it? In terms of educational leader expectations and how they are seeing it. They do understand, there is an understanding of pedagogical leadership in there in terms of the work that they're doing in connection with teaching children. But in relation to the actual function of the role, it's about the staff and what the expectations are of them, and that's a concerning thing. Here's another one. As the educational leader, I'm to guide, and this is kind of the sort of the anticipation of what they think is the interpretation of their job. I am to guide and educate staff about new practices and ideas, or discuss what we already know. I'm not confident with this role and feel overwhelmed by it on top of everything else there is to do. And I was saying to Maria earlier today also that I graduated as an as an early childhood teacher in 1982. And so that makes me really old, okay? The notion of becoming an educational leader wasn't even in the realm of my thinking. And basically, my expectation was to become a teacher of young children. And I feel I was very well prepared for that role. So while I'm going through this presentation, I would like you to also think in terms of where you are in terms of your preparedness to work in the early childhood sector, in whatever the roles that you're doing, and how much your preparation work in an academic institution has prepared you for that role. Whether we are talking about teachers, whether we are talking about academics, I don't know. Certainly it didn't prepare me to become an academic. I'm an accidental academic. I never dreamt of being in the university. I actually shied away when my supervisor kept telling me while I was doing my PhD, go and do some teaching, you've got to do some teaching. You had to do some tutoring for me. And I said to him, Larry, I want to work with young children. They're bigger than me. I don't want to be in class with the university students. And one day what happened to me was he was going on sabbatical leave, and he said, that's the stack of books that I will be using for my teaching. You've got 3 weeks of teaching to do while I'm away. That's how I became a tutor at the university, thrown in the deep end. So that was my preparation during my PhD. And I survived because the associate supervisor was a kind man. He came with me and he told the students, be kind to her, this is her first gig. So enacting leadership. You would have probably seen the paper by my colleagues, Louise Hard and Anna John Destetia, who is the Icelandic researcher who is working in this space. The paper on leadership is not a dirty word, and I totally agree with them. It is not a dirty word, but it was treated as a dirty word, certainly. In 1982, when I graduated, as I said, I did not actually hear the word leadership in my Bachelor of Early Childhood degree. In Australia, in the Australian context, leadership came into our teacher education programs in the 1990s. And nowadays you will see at least 1 or 2 dedicated units of study or modules on leadership in our teacher preparation programs in early childhood. Pedagogy, that wasn't a word that was also privileged in my undergraduate training as a teacher. And we did talk about it, but it wasn't privileged, not the way that it is now. So today, if you look at teacher education programs, you will see the word pedagogy also appearing on units of study. But it is still in the list of frightening words. And I'm here to say again, pedagogy is also not a dirty word. And what about pedagogical leadership then? It's like a barbed wire with prickly edges. And do we want to pick it up? I hope so, because it's not so prickly. This is just to give a little bit more context in terms of the Australian early childhood workforce. This is from the official census, workforce census. It's a bit old, but you can see the trend from the size of the population in 2010 to 2013. It's growing because we are building more centers. And the small size centers, like for instance, my children were at a center which was 32-place center. Nowadays you can actually get 300-place centers, the Taj Mahals I call them. And we actually haven't got any research on what actually happens because of the size of the centers. I think that's another area that's worthy of researching, and what happens to those interactions between children, between staff, and between staff and families who come and go. I was already upset about the removal from our legislation, the ceiling on the size of centers, which used to be there till about probably 2000, maybe 1997, they were already gone. In Victoria, at least, because we still have state-based regulations, even though we have a national act, was 60, but people got around it. They took 2 licenses instead of 1 and built 2 different houses on the same plot. So it was not going to work anyway, so the size of centers have gone. Not surprisingly, mostly women work in early childhood. What is, however, interesting is the age differentiation. But this needs to be taken with a pinch of salt because the men who are in the sector are mostly in outside school hours care programs, so they are also captured in this statistic, including the total workforce as well. And so there are lots of young men before they actually get a serious job working in outside school hours care programs. Qualifications also need to be taken with a little bit of pinch of salt, I would say, because yes, it's much better than what it used to be in terms of the extent of qualified staff, but you want to ask the question, what do you mean by qualified? And I think 2012, when the National Quality Framework was proclaimed, the government decreed that everybody working in a licensed early childhood centre in Australia must have a minimum of a Certificate 3. It's a vocational qualification done at a technical and further education college. And so that's what's actually contributing to that 82%. And you can see in terms of the 16% of bachelor degree qualifications is still less than a quarter. So degree qualified staff are growing, increasing, and the other thing that I am also interested to realize in New Zealand as well, that Australia is probably alone in having 4-year qualified staff with a bachelor degree. In Finland, it's still 3 years for a bachelor in comparison. And I hope it doesn't get removed, because we had to fight to actually get the 4-year qualification to be upheld. But our politicians are still talking about how well, this is our minister, and ministers, I should say, they come and go, questioning the need to have university qualified teachers in early childhood settings. So the 30% increase is also partly the certificate level teachers in the sector. Not teachers, but they're called educators. So there is a separation. And I'm not sure to what extent this is helpful when you're working in a sector, because the status of the qualifications creates different levels of interactions and presents challenges to the educational leaders who are having to work on pedagogical aspects of their programs. And I would say that the educational leaders would say that is one of the biggest challenges they encounter. So in terms of experience, the attrition and retention rates are a problem for us. Within 3 to 5 years, we lose a lot of the staff. There's another national study on workforce development being done at the moment, and that we really have to do better in terms of keeping the good ones, because we are actually retaining the bad ones. Yeah. So 10 plus years were involved in this study. So it is quite an experienced group who's actually talking like this. When you see the voices, this information is quite important to have a look at it. So, what then is pedagogy? And I like this paper written by David Hamilton, who tried to trace the roots of the pedagogical conversation. And I'm only going to be touching on this because it was just too much, and I thought, okay, I'll just touch on this to be able to move on to the other things that I want to share with you. So I love his reflections on linking the definition of pedagogy to the logic of leading children. This is particularly important because he's not necessarily talking about early childhood here. And I think this is a helpful way for us to engage in looking at pedagogical leadership in the early childhood sector, in going back to this notion about the logic and the leading of children, or the work with children. Now, in the case of Finland, which absolutely privileges pedagogy, this is very true. In the case of Australia, I would say question mark. The other bit that I like what David talks about is in terms of linking it to the work of Immanuel Kant, and in talking about the notions of support and guidance. Separating support from guidance, I think, is important. And guidance in the sense of, are we talking about directed guidance? Are we talking about the sort of the mentoring type of guidance where you are traveling with the person? And again, I don't really have a lot of time to expand on this, but mentoring is a very, very misunderstood notion in our sector. It is a subset of leadership, and it needs to be looked at a little bit more carefully than we are doing. And there are different, and it's another area where we have very little research-based evidence in the early childhood area. A lot of people write about it, but it's more op-ed pieces, opinion pieces, than empirical research. So the interest in pedagogy by educators came into the public prominence in the 1980s. So in one sense, it sort of is helpful in understanding your history about, why have we not talked about pedagogy more eloquently in our teacher education programs. And I also like this very traditional belief about pedagogy being the art, the occupation, and the practice of teaching as well, because that's helpful in unpacking the role of an educational leader in relation to pedagogy. Neoliberalism has a lot to answer for what we're doing and what's been happening. And our way of looking at the current context of early childhood in most countries, including Finland, I have to say. You might wonder why I'm referring to Finland quite a lot. It's my second homeland. I have had connections with Finland since about 1997 because I had the privilege of living and working there in early childhood, and my children experienced going to preschool to early childhood centers in Finland. And so I've seen Finnish education, Finnish early childhood education from a parent's perspective, as well as a researcher perspective as well. And I can certainly vouch for some fabulous things that they do and have done for a very long time, whilst it sounds new to us. But they are picking up, as I said to some of my colleagues recently, picking up some bad habits from Australia. They should be really copying New Zealand, not Australian bad habits. And their socialist system is breaking because of the impact of neoliberalist market orientations. Their private sector is not as big anywhere as big as in Australia, where I would say more than 50% of our services are now in the hands of the private sector. Theirs is probably about 10%, I would say. So I think in terms of Giroux's quote, I mean, he's written beautiful stuff, and I've just picked one of the comments here, is that the arbiter and essence of democracy consuming as the only operable form of citizenship. I think that's probably the thing that bothers me, and we might call it irrational, but our governments say that it is actually quite logical to let the market decide what is best for us. And the impact on our social relationships, that's what actually I think we have to focus on, letting markets, market-based philosophy, I would say. And when you think about the quotes that you saw, you can really see the impact on those social relationships when you let external forces dominate your life. So in the sense of neoliberalism and education, I think the way it's been sold to us is that this is an essential component because it's about getting jobs. And our politicians talk jobs, jobs, jobs whenever they want to actually defend their policies. And we get sucked into those conversations. What about the good citizen in the jobs place, the marketplace? Never do we hear about that. And this is a worry if we also embrace these notions by privileging parents who are looking for jobs or in employment as being our #1 customers. And I'm using those words deliberately. And about the reason, if you ask somebody, why do you need to have early childhood services? And the government, in Australia's case, is justifying that in terms of supporting parents who are looking for work or in employment. So to me, it's not. In the sort of the materialistic world of neoliberalism, it is also about wealth of a economic kind, not in terms of social capital, which I equally value as wealth. And you will see me talking about that a little bit later as well. So sponsorship or school funding, if anybody is following Australian politics, and I wouldn't want you to, but just in case, you would also see the private sector funding that our government is spending on the private schools, and the Catholic system, which kind of was sitting in between, has lost a great deal of government funding, government sponsorship, and they are rising against the government, so which is quite an interesting thing. They have never done that in the past, but I think they've had enough as well in questioning the government's, I suppose, is the reshaping of mass education, but this is not through the private sector, but it's actually through government, corporatizing the education. So increasingly vocationalized, and that is the case in our sector with the implementation of the Certificate 3 as being the basic minimum requirement, but they don't sell that part of it, but saying we have now in Australia got qualified staff with which is basically at the minimum level. So I don't think about it, it's actually about developing a national, informed national citizenry at all. So Faisal Rizvi and Bob Lingard's work has been quite instrumental in influencing my work as well. I'm showing this not for you to actually see the particular details of it, but to show you that once we had a plan, not as good as your plan that you had in New Zealand, your 10-year plan, but I know that that has kind of gone by the wayside, which is extremely sad, because we thought, oh my goodness, you achieved what we could, or we are still only dreaming about. We almost had our plan also under Rudd and Gillard, but that's actually fallen down the wayside. But what was important was that they included reforms for the workforce. But it was their fourth pillar of attack to reform and reshape early childhood in Australia. And to this day, the Labour Party, I would say, shot themselves in the foot in getting rid of Rudd before his time was up. But he really did, he and Gillard, Julia Gillard, made a big difference to what we have now in Australia, and I would always thank them for what they have done in this space in early childhood, because it made a huge difference, and we are still trying to hang on to what we can. We do have the national regulations, and it's just been reshaped, and I understand that you have also reshaped your national curriculum, so hopefully the earliest learning framework in Australia will also be reframed. We too do not have the word leadership anywhere in our national curriculum, and I doubt whether pedagogy is there either. So it'll be very interesting to see how it's been shaped. So I'm very interested to see how you have traveled on that in New Zealand. But we do need to take a planned approach. If we are going to make that's the other reason for showing this, we do need to take a planned approach. If we can't have 10, let's go for 3, is what I'm saying as a plan. Perudi's work is also important in critiquing this, and this is from a later piece. So neoliberalism assumes that citizens cannot exercise independent judgment. So governments and private institutions are entitled, I like the words here, entitled to manage and influence the behaviors of individuals in order to ensure that they make the right choices, according to who? It's really completely de-empowering. Deep loss of agency is what you can see in this. And I think this is a good reminder to ourselves that this is what not to do, and to contest it in every opportunity by asking ourselves, how much of independent judgment am I exercising in my work? So, use the negative messages to question what it is that you are doing and what you're about to do. Turn it around to your advantage to claim agency back into your hands and don't give it away. I worry a great deal with my colleagues in Australia who are forgetting this, that they can question, they don't have to comply, by simply asking, but what do you mean by that? Don't ask them that question. You make it meaningful and you explain what it is that you're doing. So don't let somebody else shape your behavior as teachers. So, so this is the national policy document which outlines what is the role of an educational leader in early childhood. The role of an educational leader, according to the National Quality Standard, was to lead the development and implementation of the educational program or curriculum. And you can even see, that's a direct quote, curriculum is sometimes a dirty word. So it's actually bracketed in the service. And it's perceived as change agents, the educational leaders being change agents. And the main task is to guide other educators in their planning and reflection and mentor colleagues in their implementation practices. Now, this is the bit that is being interpreted, misinterpreted all around Australia since 2012. All around Australia, okay? Because this is national policy. And every centre, as of last year, 2016, need to have appointed someone with the title educational leader. With very little preparation, with very little information about how do we do it, who is this person. So we are still kind of asking that question 5 years on. But luckily, there is research appearing in this space, and hopefully myself and other colleagues are contributing to helping the field to embrace what it is that we mean by educational leader. And basically, I say to people, make it what you want. Don't let somebody else decide for you. And that's not as easy as it seems. So, as I said, there's a string there of published research that's been appearing since 2012 on this whole notion of an educational leader. The absence of adequate theorization and role clarity has meant educational leaders are struggling to conceptualize their leadership responsibilities and enactment in everyday work in early childhood settings. And it is a very good example of policy preceding research evidence. We needed something. The government felt that they're going to be doing something. And in another way, I would say it's actually very good that we don't have too much of prescription on it. But we are so compliant, we don't know how to deal with lack of prescription. Okay. We're so compliant. We've just been so driven by our regulatory requirements. So this is the UNE MQ project that I was talking about at the beginning, and we asked some big picture questions, and about 164 educational leaders completed this. We also asked our students, but I'm not referring to that data. We also asked practitioners who are not educational leaders. That data is also not here, but this is directly from what I'm reporting today is directly from the survey completed by the leaders themselves. And these people are experienced. Okay? So, minimum of 2 to 4 years in that role as an educational leader. What we have done out of that study is to actually see that what is possible is to look at the educational leader's role in 3 ways. But this is just a conceptual model that has actually come from the study, but already this model is falling apart. So as we unpack it, with the details. So the area of staff management, it's there is evidence of supportive guidance work there as well. So it's not just about management, even though the whole agenda is being driven by compliance requirements, like doing the performance management. It's completely now embedded in the National Quality Standard that they have to do performance management very strictly, more than what it used to be the case. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? If it actually introduces staff to looking at their careers, looking at their work in a planned way, then performance management is a good thing. Because we haven't done it in this way of looking ahead, looking forward to looking at working in early childhood as a career. And given that we are interested in keeping the good people, we have to actually think in terms of what is your career? There aren't too many opportunities to actually look at a hierarchical notion of becoming leaders. So what are the other possibilities in the sector in terms of a career in early childhood? So for example, if you get a PhD, does it mean that you're going to get a job in the academy? It's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily the case. If you look at the USA, their centers certainly have got PhD directors with PhDs early childhood. Why not? especially if they're actually very large centers of the kind that we are actually seeing now. So there are ways of making different uses of your professional qualifications. Center administration is huge in terms of running businesses. And I still think of that as also being an area for leaders to become social entrepreneurs and looking at that creatively. And we don't have enough of information in there. So pedagogy and program, once upon a time that was only just programs. Now we are definitely talking pedagogy, and I don't know what has happened to the word curriculum. So this conceptual model is not a fixed thing, this is work in progress. So here are some voices from the practitioners who helped us with this data collection. When it comes to programs, they said things like, provide assistance to all our members of the team to implement and provide quality learning experience and exceptional programming and observation skills. So very traditional, but they felt the word exceptional programming, I'm not quite sure what they meant by exceptional programming here. Because this was a comments collected in an online survey. But I was very pleased to see that the notion of observation, the traditional work that we did, is still captured in there. To lead and guide the development of the education program, to support the development of curriculum goals. I thought, yeah, full marks. I'm so glad that you're still talking curriculum, together with program. And so that holistic notion of being a pedagogical leader, the signs are there of being able to see that. I do this by reviewing programs, developing educators' knowledge of the planning cycle and the early years learning framework. So bringing together both the practice and the policy interfaces was very helpful here with, has been captured by this one. I'll let you decide. Do you think this is confusing, courageous, or compliant? The first one definitely I would say is more on the compliant side because it's actually attempting to keep up with what is actually required. To me, there are some signs of going beyond the compliant work in the second one, but it's mixed. So the focus on pedagogy, work alongside all of the staff, develop lead direction and encourage provocations, challenge, and reflective practice. This case actually included much more directed references to pedagogy. And I've clipped it here because just to include this one because they were quite separate conversations questions. It actually still included the word, the notion of, their job was not just to simply let their colleagues continue with their practices, but also to provoke them. And I think that is a good thing in terms of courageous acts. Building staff capacity through the provision of weekly pedagogical meetings and designing studies conducted in the pedagogical meetings to guide staff understanding and develop a range of perspectives from which to view children's learning. I really like the notion of going beyond the basics of a program-based orientation. But there is a worry, and I put this one in here because the notion of weekly pedagogical meetings, you will see that also as a thing to do. They come together to do weekly pedagogical meetings, and there's a lot of documentation happening in relation to those weekly conversations. Whether or not it actually gets progressed into something else, I don't know. I'm in the middle of analyzing some data from Finland at the moment with colleagues. there too, this notion of pedagogical meetings, weekly pedagogical meetings are happening. So we pick up on these words, and how it is being processed is interesting, to what extent it is actually a deeper level of engagement by the practitioners themselves. So what we don't have, and this is a limitation of this kind of a study, is that this is what the leaders are saying they are doing. I would like to have heard the voices of the practitioners to say, what did they take away from these weekly pedagogical meetings? Were they sitting there listening to the educational leader saying, this is what I have found? Or were they actually co-constructing what they have been doing and reshaping where to go next in the way that pedagogical developments should be occurring within organizational context? I don't know. So that's a limitation of an online study. A lot of extra work in my own time, says this educational leader, to prepare readings and provocations for staff, researching pedagogical practices, oversee staff programs and documentation, and then she brings in the compliant activities of performance reviews and the identification of PD requirements and opportunities. So again, a limitation of not knowing what does that mean, because just because you have got performance reviews, if they're being used in terms of advancing the practitioner as well as advancing the pedagogy of the center, to the extent that, you know, through the performance management, it's been identified that this person needs to do X, Y, and Z. That's a good thing. That's a good thing to have happened, because then you can actually go and learn about it. Or if this person will benefit from actually working with another practitioner in another center, or another practitioner in the same center, problem solving and looking for possible ways of enhancing practice is a good thing. But you know, we all know that performance reviews can be used to get rid of staff and, you know, really basically used in a negative way. And we have that at the university as well. Staff support functions. To support and guide educators and encourage teamwork, support educators with ideas, thought provocation, proofreading, and support with their studies, and also with resources. So pretty regular sort of, you know, stuff there in that comment. To motivate, encourage, empower educators with the tools to assist them to succeed. So to me, that is really a way of not just telling people what to do, but taking them out of what they're doing in the day-to-day to look for, you know, beyond the day-to-day. I've just been given the 10 minutes, so I'm going to have to move on quickly. Yeah, I mean, the last one is there too, and, you know, they do mention theoretical understandings coming into this space as well. So this is some of it is, which is definitely not confusing, but very much in the sort of the compliant space as well. Staff management, very quickly, we're very compliant oriented, and you can see both of those comments are not what I would acknowledge as being in the focus on the courageous side of things. I'm going to move on to look at some other things now, away from the data. Anyway, these kinds of conversation around transformational educational practice is now appearing in our literature connected with early childhood as well. And it's quite interesting when you sort of, you know, put things side by side, that notions of inclusion, innovation, inspiration and passion comes through the literature quite strongly as common themes in scholarly literature. Pollard's work, Pollard is actually an a school education scholar, and my colleagues Karina Davis, Susan Craig, and Smith, Kylie Smith from Melbourne University. True to their words, it's representing passion instead of charisma, separation. But what I'm saying is that, yes, these are all important, but it's not cutting it. It's not cutting it. This is quite a sad one. Very quickly, I run staff meetings and have introduced my co-workers to doing the learning stories and making the connection to the framework. And this is New Zealand influence, learning stories. Connection to the framework on a daily basis. I'm also collecting the mail, checking the mail, doing the shopping, etc., etc. And there's been no training and no job description and no time allowance for these extra duties. And as you can tell, it is not very satisfactory arrangement. This is very common. Sadly, they are overwhelmed and too much to do, and not having a job description is a problem. Now, this model is a conceptual model that we have in our leadership book written with colleagues at Macquarie, Sandra Cheeseman, Faye Hadley, Marianne Fennick, and Wendy Shepherd. And we believe that these three elements must be present when we are talking about leadership. And people say, but why would you sort of put position there? And I've used the word position there because it goes with the two P's. I'm just being honest about it. But really what I'm talking about there is more about the responsibility for the authority you have, which comes with the job. And we are not good at using that authority in the decision making. So we need to get more confident in using that authority to speak because we have been given a privileged position and we are holding a particular job. And if we get better at using it, and so the same goes to the notion of an educational leader that the government has told us we should have. Well, we got to get better at using it. So this is the model that I conceptualized and Kushla Shrivens tested in New Zealand, and it worked, and I'm eternally grateful for her because before I could ever test it, she did it already in New Zealand. And this is about the importance of expertise. The importance of expertise in becoming an educational leader in early childhood. And this model is representative of a center where there are 4 people who can act in leadership roles. There's a person who is very good at working with children birth to 3, somebody who's actually better at doing the curriculum for the preschoolers, and somebody who's very good in the public space, in the advocacy work that we have always done. And hey, technology integration is a big issue now in Australia. I'm sure it is here too. So I put that one in. That wasn't in the original model, but just to modernize it a little bit. The importance is that not only do you have that knowledge, your expertise, you can actually talk about it. In other words, make it explicit. And it's shared. If you just carry the knowledge by yourself and keep it to yourself, what's the use of it? You're not being a leader because it's just your knowledge. You're keeping it to yourself. It's multiple levels of activity. Excuse me. Here, you are actually looking at the whole organization. And if you want to, and as somebody said to me, you can conceptualize it from Brenner's model. It's not only stuck inside your organization, it actually is moving forward throughout the community. And you are being articulate in terms of practicing this way as a distributed leader. You are with other people, working as partners, and you are being strategic. So you do have a long-term plan. So this is my way of conceptualizing distributed leadership. And it's all about learning. This goes hand in hand with learning. So I absolutely privilege knowledge, absolutely believe in diversity, because you are working in diverse communities, you are working with diverse people from diverse backgrounds in your work, and you do need to develop partnerships. And I do mean partnerships where it is about co-construction of knowledge and shaping the opportunities to move forward. We can't be experts on everything. So, so what we already know about educational leadership is about leadership goes hand in hand with vision, leadership goes hand in hand with learning, and leadership goes hand in hand with the connectedness that you make. You have to make all of these. This is about articulating your vision. You know, it's no point having a vision and not being able to share it with other people. You need to give it life. So if you are students at the moment, and if you haven't started writing what it is that you want to achieve as an early childhood teacher, educator, whatever the place you are in, everybody should have a vision about what they want to do. So I say to students, start giving life to your vision now. And my colleague, Eva Huyala, always says, dream the big dreams. And it is your job then to actually make it come to life. But imagine, you know, yourself getting into a lift with a very powerful person, and they will give you, a fistful of dollars, and I'm talking millions of dollars. What will you do? If you don't have a vision, you're not going to be able to answer that responsibly. You're not going to get another chance to meet this person. And you would say, what are you going to say? You're stuck. You need to be prepared. Leaders need to be prepared all the time. So it is about intention. That's what makes a good leader, because there are good and bad leaders, as we all know through history. And if you want to make a difference in terms of citizens around the world, and I'm talking children too, because they are citizens, then this is what you would be doing. So intentional leaders are educators who engage in ethical practice. This is important in curbing those negative aspects of leadership that's possible by implementing leadership responsibilities in positive, purposeful ways. And you do need to think about your area of influence that you're going to want to make a difference in. And I dream about an early childhood graduate becoming the Minister for Early Childhood in Australia. It's one of my big dreams. And I say this to students every year. And I've had about 3 or 4 people coming and saying to me, I am interested in a life in politics. And I said, let me know when you're ready, I'll be your campaign manager. So we need someone who actually understands early childhood. So this is where I am at the moment with my colleagues in Finland. We are unraveling the notions of teacher leadership in relation to pedagogical leadership. Because what's happening, as I said at the beginning, is that the complexities of running a center is overcrowding leadership of center directors. And what is also happening in Scandinavia, and it's not only Finland, but also Norway, Sweden as well, is that their center directors are being taken out of their centers, and they're becoming traveling directors. So they are not even based at their centers, they are in the municipal offices. So this is making them question who is actually safeguarding the interests of pedagogy and effective pedagogy. It has to be with the teachers. It has to be with the teachers because they are there every day. And so teacher leaders are the ones that we should be looking at more and more. So we have been writing about this. We are currently about to write about this as well. We did a presentation at ISRA last year, and we've been tracking through educational leadership literature, and Fairman and McKenzie's work particularly is quite important here. And so I'll let you think about some of this, and unfortunately, I'm running out of time, but if you can see the authors, Hogenstedt and Bowie are the Norwegians. They have also done the shadowing studies of capturing on video. I think it's quite a unique study, and looking at ways of capturing evidence of teacher leadership in practice. And I would like to think that we can do some work like this in New Zealand. Dora Ho is from Hong Kong. Comer and Field are my colleagues in Australia, and Kay Comer's just finished her PhD, and it's a fabulous PhD to look at, and she looked at professional learning and development. So there are different aspects of this. Very, very quickly, I do believe that teachers with agency, agentic teachers, a concept that Josh Nottle, another New Zealander, you see how important you guys are to us in influencing our thinking. Using her concept, I'm linking it with pedagogical leadership, and very much believe in the centrality of pedagogy in teaching and learning, in the work that we do as teachers fundamentally. And pedagogy is the core business, and I am using neoliberalist language in there deliberately, because if you talk about business, then you would think in terms of infiltrating that space. And the shared language, I think that's our problem, because we have been so frightened by the language of pedagogy and curriculum that we don't talk about it. And I think we need to have more conversations, and I do very much feel privileged to have been able to speak about this even a little bit today with you. And it is about the making possible relationships. And my dear friend and colleague, Karen Martin, who is the one and only professor of early childhood who is from an Indigenous background, put it much more eloquently than I could ever do, because to her, relationships are the very essence of being an Indigenous person. So she says, for me, leadership is not about power. It is more about knowing who you are. This is really important. Understanding the self comes first. And it's about where you come from and where you are going next. How many of us can say we know and understand where we are going next? And I think as teacher educators, we do need to make a difference in terms of career guidance, which I never got as a part of my preparation to become a teacher. This means leadership is about looking after your relations and relationships, or your relatedness. Agency is only possible when this attention and responsibility is fulfilled and lived. It has to become normalized as everyday practice. Not easy to do, not easy to do. Therefore, leadership by Aboriginal understanding, this is according to Karen, is only possible when relatedness is clear, relationships are active, and agency is shared. Beautiful quote, beautiful quote. I never tire of listening to Karen. So creating social capital is what I'm about. So you do need to have the first I, which is about information. You do have to have the second I, which is about imagination. And you need to be able to have the mindset to bring it together. The integration of that is our responsibility as educational leaders. And it is about reciprocity, which is a value-based comment that I'm making here. It's two ways. It's two ways. And understanding that you are part of it, whatever the conversations you're understanding, is important in creating social capital. So finally, this is what I would like to leave you with, my current thinking on this, that I believe very strongly about reconnecting with my roots, with your roots, is what I'm suggesting. Who influenced your interest in becoming part of the early childhood profession? As I said, I didn't come into this space, as a school leaver going, knowing at 4 years of age that I want to become a teacher. But I am a 4th generation teacher. So when I finally made the switch to study early childhood teaching, my mother said to me, "It's in your blood," and she laughed. "Why would you fight it?" And here I am. Renew your commitment and assist others to understand the intergenerational connections. We in Australia actually don't recognize our elders. It's not a country to grow old in. I would like to believe that New Zealand is far better at this, that you recognize your elders and their place. We need to bring in the elders into our children's lives. There's the wisdom of the old ones that we shouldn't forget. Reflect on your values and your beliefs about education. Why is it important to you? I don't know whether my great-grandchildren will go to university to prepare for whatever it is that they're going to be doing in their lifetime. So is mass education, the way we know it now, going to continue the way it is? I can certainly look back at 20 years ago, or even 30 years of my life as an early childhood teacher. Things have changed, and things are changing. So how would you respond to diversity? Because we are different. But don't look for sameness. Learn to actually deal with the differences, because that's where the answers will be. Defining a personal vision, I think I've talked about this. You need to actually start big, start dreaming, and put it in writing, commit to it. Activate by setting some specific goals to achieve, and some timelines for yourselves. Thank you.
My name is and I'm a lecturer in the Pacifica Early Childhood Specialisation here at Faculty of Education. Thank you, Maria, so much for this honour to be the discussant for Professor Manjula Waniganayak today. I've been practicing too.
Well done, you.
I actually recall the first time I came across Professor Manjula Waniganayaki's work as an actual head teacher in the infant and toddler group. And I remember reading about distributed leadership for the first time, and I had been in this leadership position for a couple of weeks thinking, what am I doing? Some of the talk that you've said around initial teacher education, and often those who are put into leadership positions in early childhood education feel very ill-prepared. So although this is something that you raised in your research a number of years ago, I still think that it's very relevant to where we are today in the early childhood context. I'm an awful note taker, so forgive me, but there's 4 points that I really picked up and thought that I'd like to just touch on again with the audience as well. And I won't take up too many questions, so I can hand the time over to you to ask questions. I found it really interesting as you talked about the historical context of leadership in Australia and the changing landscape of ECE in Australia and the privatisation of early childhood education. And we certainly can relate to that here in Aotearoa. And hearing even the language itself is influencing leadership discourse in ECE. Words like exceptional, entitled, customer, compliancy, all of these words which permeate from the agendas of neoliberalism and the presence of neoliberalism in ECE. And I think it's really important that as early childhood teachers, as early childhood leaders, that we make ourselves aware about what informs our own philosophies around leadership practice. I picked up on that and other particular aspects that I enjoyed as well, coming back to pedagogy. And I can also recall in my doing my Bachelor of ECE, coming across the word pedagogy for the first time and feeling quite quite overwhelmed and frightened by this word. But looking at pedagogy as the art of teaching and learning, and if we think of pedagogy as an art, we too can think of leadership as the art of leadership. So leadership itself is generative, it's expressive, it's creative, and it is about the sharing of knowledge, which you've talked about. Another aspect in here, the 3 Ps I wrote, position, place, and person. I think one thing when I first started looking into, trying to come to understand what early childhood leadership is all about, there are many trendy terms that get dropped and many concepts which are universalized. And I think through your suggestion here about position, place, and person, you're emphasizing actually how important the context is when we're conceptualizing leadership in ECE. The context, the situatedness of leadership. So about the relationships, about, I'm going to use the Samoan term, the va, which is an Indigenous perspective, but that relational space. So the position, the place, the person. And I think I'll stop there and I'll open up the floor to any questions that you might have for Professor Waniganayak.
The first one is always the hard one, isn't it?
Okay, I did have a question. I will add my question in.
Sure.
My question is about initial teacher education.
Yeah.
And you talked about a vision.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, in terms of, and you also mentioned a preparedness or being prepared in a sense of leadership. I'm wondering, in terms of initial teacher education, what would your vision be for initial teacher education and growing, I guess, leadership capacity within the sector?
Oh, I'm now on.
That's a really big question.
Yeah, I'm on dangerous grounds here, but I will still say what I usually say about this, and it's leadership preparation is not something that you can actually just acquire, and I use the words deliberately, acquire. It is something that you need to spend time thinking about, reflecting, and it's not for everybody. So, I do go to centers where people, say that everybody's a leader here. And I get troubled by that. And it's the same as not everybody is a good teacher either. And you do get the exceptional teachers, and you do get people who can become, you can learn to become a leader, you can learn to become a teacher as well. So in relation to initial teacher education, even though I have included in the courses that I have helped to design at the universities that I have been at, leadership units of study, that is only raising awareness, orientation to leadership that you can do in that initial teacher preparation courses. I believe very strongly in postgraduate studies to really help you go to the next phase of fully appreciating what does that work actually involve. So at Macquarie University, we do have a Master of Educational Leadership, specializing in early childhood, because the context matters, as I said from the start, and as you have also valued, Yukoba, as well. So our program allows you to specialize either in school-based context or in early childhood context. To get into that program, one of the prerequisites is the 2 years of experience in the sector. before you come back to study at a master's level. So we can orientate you, so we can actually help you to aspire to leadership positions through an initial teacher preparation program, but I'm not sure that you are going to be sufficiently prepared to take on that role after 3 or 4 years of teacher education. So, yeah.
You know how every centre in Australia has an education leader? How long would someone be working in the sector before they get chosen to be education leader? Like how qualified do they have to be, or how long do they have to work before that decision is made?
That's the problem. There is no prescription on this. They can be, walking out of the university today, and they'll be appointed as the educational leader for that center tomorrow, by virtue of being the only person in that center with a bachelor degree in early childhood. And as awful as it sounds, there are people who have not done a degree. They have only got a Certificate 3 vocational qualification, and some of those programs are terrible programs. Maybe 6 weeks, 4 weeks programs, and they have got their Certificate 3. And they too can be appointed as an educational leader, because the government says, thou shalt have an educational leader.
So it's just really a waste.
Yeah. So, I get into trouble because I talk about needing postgraduate qualifications to do that role properly. And, you also have center directors doing both those roles. And you cannot do a good job, because running a business, and some of these centers, because they're big, are multi-million-dollar budgets. And, so you've got to have, oversight of the operational matters, which takes you away from the pedagogical work. And sometimes the center directors may not be actually have the time, even if they are well qualified, well trained bachelor graduates. Yeah. So we are hoping that we can put some prescription around it through teacher registration. That's the other avenue that I'm trying to come at it at the moment. We are only just beginning to have teacher registration for early childhood teachers in Australia.
Because in New Zealand you can't even be associate teacher without having a fully registration, so you can't even mentor students without being fully registered.
Yeah. So so I'm looking for a policy instrument, but I'm also a bit afraid of how it could be also misused. So these are conversations we are having bit by bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Oh, sorry.
Deacon's job.
Go deep.
Okay, I'll just quickly say my thing. It's just that I worry about leaving it at neoliberalism and the effects of neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Because at the moment we're seeing a strong populist movement right across the world.
Yes.
Conservatism that we've never seen before.
Yes.
And I think that conservatism was also linked to compliance. And I think that conservatism is something that we see in our centres. So, personally, I think support, guidance, yes, but I think we need grappling with complexity,
Yes.
Articulating clearly,
Yeah.
saying it more loudly than we do.
Yeah.
So, do you...
Diti, I agree with you. I think, in a sense, neoliberalism, as you say, has become popularized by world leaders, embracing that language. And I think it's coming into the early childhood space, full on. And when Finland goes, we'll all go. the Finnish effect.
Brexit.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know, please hold the line in Finland, and they are struggling. They are struggling in Finland, I mean, I also want to break the binary in terms of the private versus public as well, because I see that early childhood graduates are also wanting to create their own centers. I saw pockets of this in Sweden some time ago, you know, even including a group of university academics, early childhood academics, starting up their own center. So I don't actually necessarily see that all private centers are bad. You know, I really want to be very clear about that. You know, so we don't understand the private sector because there isn't a great deal of research happening which are inclusive and openly, transparently, you know, engaged in research. So, you know, we need to include, because almost all of my work has been done in public centers, community-based centers. So what does that say? There's a huge gap. Something is not quite right in our evidence. It's lopsided, okay? So we do need to engage with the private sector much more openly and actually get them to see what is happening as well. You know, so I agree with you in terms of the mass, you know, popularism.
I just wanted to follow on from DT's point in terms of the influence of neoliberalism here in this particular country, where the private sector has had a huge influence in the public arena. And my biggest concern is that when we graduate teachers, they automatically fall into a default position because they take up these leadership roles with lack of experience, and they haven't had time to actually enjoy being a teacher.
Yeah.
And so we see a lot of teachers burn out in their first couple of years.
Yeah.
And so, you know, how do we protect our graduates going out who are full of enthusiasm, can't wait to contribute to the sector without losing them at the same time? I did a visit with a student who said to me, a student in her cohort that she graduated with, this is an ex-student, has opened up her own centre.
Yeah.
This is only 2 years out.
Yeah.
And so for me, the whole sector itself, ECE as a whole, we are in troubling times. And it doesn't help because when we think about leadership, it's so complex, you know, and it's so challenging. And so, you know, I know we're not going to get answers, but I do believe that the conversations have to start within the sector itself.
Yeah. The answers is actually in the collaboration. And the collaborations continue beyond the university that you've actually been part of. And, you know, so as teacher educators attached to a university, if we can continue to mentor our students, former students who are graduates, in some way from inside the university to, encourage them to continue their links with us. If we have relatedness in the way that Karen Martin is talking about, then we can remain connected. So that's what I'm looking for, you know, ways to nurture that relatedness at different levels, the different spheres of activity that we are in. So, you know, if we lose those connections, then we actually are on our own. And it's not going to be work. It'll continue what we have. So we have to break the chain.
Possibly, I'm thinking of DD's comment around complexity as well, but inside the context of what you're worried about and the way in which there's been these movements that have come back to the heroic leader.
Yes.
And I remember in the moment in your slides when you drew on Pollard's work,
yes,
around which had connections back
yes,
to very old ideas of leadership in
yep,
terms of charismatic and inspirational, yep, and all, yep, the rest. Contrasted with Kylie Smith and the Melvins, yep, on the What I'm wondering is our problem is locking the leadership or tying the leadership too much to the positional leadership,
Yep.
blinkering it around
Yep.
positional leadership.
Yep.
So most of our questions have been to try and understand leadership in terms of a person who's holding a position. And yes, the logic of leading for children, or of teaching,
Yep.
I mean, in pedagogy that you drew attention to,
Yep.
and then the same, the sort of common view of leadership as the logic of influencer
Yep.
without manipulating. So at least
Yep.
you then get to an ethical tension.
Yeah.
That when you are with your colleagues
Yep.
and you're trying to bring about an influence change, it's an ethical tension because there's things that one would hope, as we've discussed, you know something about and that you are doing in that role. But we seem still locked into the risk of all the things when leadership is the position.
Yeah.
And until we perhaps think of leadership somehow as the force or the flow or something that's dealing with the way subjectivities are transformed in the place. So we think collective subjectivities or communal, whatever.
Yeah.
So maybe, I suppose that's my reaction to it.
Yeah.
And different understanding of the distribution, distributed leadership.
Yeah.
It's not a distribution of the positional power, a distribution of all those other things that you talk about. I don't know, I haven't really asked a question, but just throwing those threads back into that space.
But thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, John, because you're making me now reflect on what I have done today in terms of the presentation. And perhaps when I look at these, we already know about vision, learning, and connectedness in relation to leadership. But perhaps we should be thinking hierarchically at one level,
and then,
looking at connectedness, beginning with connectedness,
multiple,
and look upwards of who are we connected to, who are we connected with, and sustain those connectednesses. And those relationships then become the driver rather than the position.
I've always felt that we're very blessed in New Zealand with Te Whāriki because we have whakapanaungatanga. And we have a horizontal, pervasive connect. The relational is just absolutely the heart of the change, transform the space. But in that space, it does actually require us to sometimes let go of the word leader as being the positional person. So we
that's
can
okay by me.
think of the child lead, the infant leader, in a sense, not as really as a moment, as a moment that we can see something that's possible in the new vision.
Yeah.